The transport ship dropped from the sky like a stone falling through an endless abyss, its engines roaring in protest as it broke through the atmosphere of Scythe. The planet was everything they had warned about and more, a hellscape of jagged cliffs, swirling toxic winds, and a sky that seemed to pulse with an ominous red hue. The humans inside the cramped shuttle were silent except for the occasional murmur or quiet breath. As they gripped their harnesses, the doors opened with a hiss, and before they could even react, the ramp hit the ground with a thud, and the humans were unceremoniously thrown out into the waiting chaos. The planet was alive in a way they couldn't understand, the air thick with the stench of decay, and something else darker, a primal energy that vibrated through every cell in their bodies. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, covered in strange spiny plants and jagged rocks. The very landscape seemed to be alive. Each step they took, the earth pushed back against them, as though it didn't want them there, and the wind howled like a wild animal angry at their intrusion. The group huddled together instinctively, fear creeping into their minds, as they took in the landscape stretching out before them. Towering trees with twisted roots that seemed to shift and move, as though they had a mind of their own. Great mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks hidden by swirling clouds, and in the air above them, something massive stirred. The humans could feel it, a predator that had no interest in mercy or weakness. One of them, a woman named Sarah, glanced around, her eyes wide with panic, but her voice was steady as she spoke. "We need to make shelter now." The words echoed in the tense silence that followed as the humans scrambled to gather whatever they could, a few blankets, a few rations, some basic tools. The Carvex had provided them with everything designed to make them feel helpless, but the humans weren't going to lie down and die. They would survive. This planet would not break them. As night began to fall, the temperature plummeted, and the air grew cold in a way that took them by surprise. It wasn't just the chill, it was the sense of being hunted. They could feel it in their bones. The planet wasn't just dangerous, it was actively watching them, waiting for the first mistake, the first sign of weakness. But the humans weren't weak. They were survivors. The leader of the group, the tall man named Marcus, gripped his knife tightly and scanned the darkening horizon. Something out there moved, and he wasn't sure what it was, but he knew it wasn't good. The first attack came without warning. The earth beneath their feet trembled, and a low rumble echoed through the trees. It was a roar so deep it rattled their teeth, and as they turned to face it, the air was filled with the sound of something fast and lethal crashing toward them, a creature with scales like iron and eyes that glowed with an unnatural hunger broke through the underbrush. It was a massive thing, almost as tall as a man on its hind legs, with claws that looked like they could tear through steel. The humans scattered instinctively, but Marcus didn't hesitate. He shouted for everyone to fall back and take cover, but not to run. They couldn't outrun this thing. They would have to fight back, using the land itself as their ally. The creature howled again, its jaws snapping shut with a vicious crack. But the humans weren't done yet. They were just beginning, and they would show this planet what humanity was made of. The humans scattered into the dense underbrush with the roar of the creature echoing in their ears, their hearts racing as they darted between trees and rocks, trying to keep their distance. But the creature was fast, its massive legs pounding the earth as it closed in on them. They could hear its breathing, hot and heavy like a freight train barreling toward them, its claws scraping against the rocky soil. It was almost upon them, but Sarah knew they didn't have much time before the thing would tear them apart if they didn't do something fast. Marcus was already shouting orders, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. "Everyone fall back to the ravine and spread out. Keep moving, keep it guessing," he yelled. And without hesitation, the humans obeyed, instinctively moving as a unit despite the chaos of their surroundings. They weren't soldiers, but they had learned to survive in the wild before they knew how to think on their feet and adapt to anything, even this planet's savage landscape. As they moved, Marcus spotted a narrow ravine to their left. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. They needed the high ground, and the cover it provided. The creature was closing in, but they had to use their surroundings to their advantage. As they reached the ravine, Marcus signaled for everyone to stop and take cover behind the jagged rocks that lined the path. They crouched low, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature's claws clicked on the stone. As it came closer, the humans' only hope was to make it think they were already gone, to make it lose interest. The creature stalked past them, its massive head swinging side to side, its glowing eyes scanning the ground, but it couldn't see them hiding in the shadows. The humans held their breath, praying that it wouldn't find them as it passed by the air, hummed with tension, every muscle in their bodies locked in place. But then the wind shifted, and the creature's head whipped toward them, its nostrils flaring. It had caught their scent. Marcus didn't hesitate. He shouted fire, and with a quick motion he tossed a rock into the underbrush to the side of the creature, distracting it for a moment. The humans leaped into action immediately. The plan was simple and brutal, using the environment to their advantage. One of them, Sarah, dashed forward from behind a boulder and set fire to a pile of dry branches she had gathered earlier, her flare catching the wind and sending a stream of fire toward the creature's massive hide. It shrieked in surprise, but the fire didn't do much more than momentarily blind it and cause it to lurch backward in pain. Now the creature was angry, but it was also confused, and that was exactly what they needed. Marcus and a few others moved swiftly, working as a team to get in close enough to use their weapons. The guns they had been given by the Xarvex didn't work. Nothing seemed to function properly on this planet. But they'd learned how to craft crude spears and traps out of the raw materials they could find nearby. Within moments, they'd fashioned a snare trap made of thick vines and logs ready to spring. The creature roared in fury, charging straight toward them, its massive jaws snapping, but the humans were prepared. They pulled the rope that triggered the trap, and the creature was caught. It struggled violently, but it was already entangled. The humans wasted no time moving forward together. They stabbed at the creature's weak points, its eyes and underbelly, targeting its vulnerabilities with precision. They had no choice. They had to finish it quickly, or it would finish them. Finally, with a deafening screech, the creature fell limp. The humans stood around it, panting, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. It was over, but the reality of what they had just done set in. They had faced a monster and survived. They had done what no other species had done on this world. They had fought back. They weren't just surviving, they were learning to fight. And they were going to make sure that this planet would not be their grave, it would be their proving ground. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the others, his eyes full of determination. "That's just the first one," he said with a hard grin. "This planet may want to kill us, but it's going to learn that humanity is a lot harder to kill than it thinks." The humans stood over the massive carcass of the tusk stalker, their bodies trembling from the adrenaline, but their minds racing. The sense of accomplishment in taking down the creature was powerful, but they knew this was just one battle on a world that seemed to be filled with nothing but danger. Marcus, still holding his makeshift spear, was the first to break the silence. "We're not done yet. This is only the beginning." Sarah nodded, wiping dirt and blood from her face, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to keep moving. If this thing was here, there's a good chance there are more." It was a sobering thought. The tusk stalker might have been massive and terrifying, but it was far from the only predator on this planet. They couldn't afford to linger. They needed shelter, a place to regroup and think. As the last of the adrenaline drained from their systems, they turned their attention to the task at hand: survival. They quickly skinned the creature, using its thick hide to fashion makeshift armor and tools. The bones could be sharpened into weapons, the meat could be salted and preserved. Every part of the tusk stalker would serve a purpose. Nothing could be wasted. It was a harsh lesson, but one they had to learn fast. They moved toward higher ground, hoping to find a place that offered a bit more protection from the dangers of the Deathworld. The terrain was unforgiving. Sharp rocks, unstable cliffs, and deep ravines forced them to stay alert. Every rustle of leaves, every gust of wind, made them pause and listen for signs of predators. It wasn't just the creatures they had to worry about. This planet itself seemed to want them dead. The air was thick with toxins, and the very soil beneath their feet seemed to resent their presence, shifting in strange ways. As they ascended a rocky outcrop, they found a small cave nestled in the side of the cliff, a natural shelter that might offer them some respite. They entered cautiously, weapons ready, and scanned the area. It was dark, but they could make out the outlines of stone walls and a narrow passage deeper into the cave. Perfect, Marcus muttered. We'll stay here tonight. It's not much, but it'll do. They set up a fire using dry twigs they gathered earlier, and within moments, the crackling flames provided the only light in the cave. The warmth was a welcome relief after the cold chill that had settled over them during the night, but the warmth also brought their exhaustion into sharper focus. Their bodies ached, their eyes heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Tomorrow, Sarah said, her voice soft but determined, we need to start scouting. We need to find a way to stay ahead of whatever's out there. The others murmured their agreement, but Marcus spoke up, his tone serious. We can't just keep running. We've got to get our hands on more resources, and we need to find a way to fight back, not just survive. We have the tools, the weapons. We need to take the fight to this planet. They spent the night strategizing, coming up with a plan. They would build more traps, create better weapons, and start searching for more of the alien technology they'd found in the wreckage earlier. They had the skills, the will, and the determination to survive. But now, they had to ensure they were more than just survivors. They had to become conquerors. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the jagged horizon, they set out from the cave, their minds focused on the future. The Tusk Stalker's remains were left behind, a grim reminder of what they had already faced and what they would continue to face. But there was no fear in their eyes anymore. They had faced death and won. They were ready for whatever came next. As they moved through the dense jungle, a faint rumble echoed in the distance. It wasn't the wind this time. It was the sound of something large, something far more dangerous. The Deathworld wasn't done testing them. And now, neither were they. With every step forward, the humans knew one thing for sure. The planet might try to kill them, but humanity wasn't going down without a fight. They were ready for what came next. As the humans moved deeper into the jungle, they felt a growing sense of unease. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves, sent a chill down their spines. They were no longer strangers to the dangers of Scythe, but with each step, it became more apparent that the world was alive in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. There was something out there watching them, something far more intelligent than the Tusk Stalker. It wasn't long before they realized they weren't the only predators on this planet. A sudden shriek split the air, a sound so high-pitched it made their ears ring. The ground vibrated beneath their feet, and the atmosphere seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. It was as if the very world itself was reacting to the sound. Marcus's eyes darted around, scanning for the source of the noise. Everyone, spread out. Stay low. The humans instinctively moved into positions, using the terrain to their advantage. It was a survival instinct that had kicked in, and it was something they were starting to trust more than their fear. Then, the trees parted, and they saw it. It was a venom hound, a creature of nightmare proportions. Its sleek body shimmered in the dim light, its 4 long legs ending in claws that looked like they could carve through flesh like butter. Its eyes were a sickly green, glowing with an unnatural intelligence. It was no mere animal, it was a predator, and it had clearly been tracking them for some time. What made it truly terrifying, however, was the venomous tendrils that extended from its back, coiling like serpents in the air. They were quick, lethal, and deadly. The venom hound's eyes locked onto them. And for a moment, the world seemed to slow. It sniffed the air, its head tilting as if it were assessing them, determining which one of them would be the easiest to take down. Sarah swallowed hard, her hand tightening around the makeshift spear she had crafted from the bones of the Tusk Stalker. She had fought once already, but this was different. The venom hound was not a creature of brute force. It was a calculating hunter, and they were its prey. "Don't move," Marcus whispered. His voice was barely audible, but it was enough to command their attention. "We need to outthink it, not fight it head-on." The group nodded, their eyes locked on the creature. They had learned their lesson on Scythe. Survival wasn't about brute strength. It was about tactics, about using the terrain, about using what you had at your disposal. And right now, They had the high ground. The venom hound moved closer, its tendrils swaying with each calculated step. It was almost upon them when Marcus made his move. He grabbed a rock the size of his head and threw it with all his might, sending it crashing into the bushes behind the creature. The venom hound's head whipped around, its tendrils jerking in the direction of the noise. "Go! Now!" Marcus shouted. Without hesitation, the humans darted forward, using the confusion to their advantage. Sarah and a few others sprinted toward a large boulder on their right, ducking behind it just as the venom hound's gaze snapped back in their direction. The creature hissed, its tendrils flaring, but they were already out of its immediate line of sight. For a moment, the world went quiet. The venom hound paced back and forth, its claws clicking on the stone, but it was hesitant. The humans had done exactly what they needed to do. They had made it uncertain. The venom hound was now unsure of its position. It had lost its initial confidence, and that was all the time they needed. Marcus looked to his left and nodded at Sarah. It was time to make the final move. They had one shot, and they had to make it count. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing a bundle of sharp sticks they'd made earlier, Sarah lit them on fire using the remains of their previous campfire. She hurled them at the venom hound, the flames arcing through the air and catching the creature's tendrils. The venom hound screeched, thrashing violently as the fire spread. The venomous tendrils writhed, burning with a fury that forced it into retreat. For the first time since they'd landed on Scythe, the humans were the ones who controlled the outcome. The venom hound was no longer the hunter, it was the hunted. The creature stumbled backward, its once certain movements now erratic as it struggled to free itself from the flames. The humans didn't wait to see if it would recover. They took advantage of the moment, slipping deeper into the jungle, using the chaos to their advantage. The venom hound was momentarily distracted, but they knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. They had survived once again, but the price was getting steeper with every victory. "We're learning," Sarah said as they caught their breath. "We're starting to outsmart them." Marcus smiled grimly, wiping the sweat from his brow. "And we're just getting started. This world won't break us. We'll break it first." They knew that Scythe had only just begun to reveal its true horrors, but for the first time since their arrival, they weren't just surviving. They were taking control. The jungle around them was alive with the sounds of predators, low growls, snapping branches, and the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. The humans kept moving, their pace swift and steady as they navigated the harsh terrain. They had learned quickly that staying in one place for too long was a death sentence, and the venom hound's failed attack had only reinforced that lesson. Marcus led the group with a quiet confidence, his mind always calculating their next move. Sarah followed closely behind, her eyes scanning the shadows for movement, while the others stayed alert, their senses sharpened by the experiences they'd already endured. The Tuskstalker had been the first of many trials, but the venom hound had been different. It wasn't just a creature of instinct. It was smart, a cunning hunter that had adapted to its environment. If the humans were going to survive on Scythe, they would need to be just as clever, just as ruthless. "We need to find a more permanent shelter," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "Somewhere we can fortify, maybe even turn into a base of operations. We're not going to keep running forever." Sarah nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Agreed. But we need something defensible, something that'll give us the advantage, not just a place to hide." The others murmured in agreement, and for a while, the group traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape had changed again. Rocky hills gave way to dense forest, the trees towering above them like silent sentinels. The air felt thicker, more oppressive, as though the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. After several hours of searching, they stumbled upon a natural clearing. It wasn't much, just a small patch of land surrounded by thick trees and overgrown vines, but it had the one thing they needed: defensibility. A narrow pass led into the clearing, and while it wasn't perfect, It was a place they could fortify. The humans immediately got to work, gathering resources and using the Tusk-Stalker's remains to reinforce their position. They used its bones as stakes, it tied as a makeshift barrier, and the sharp rocks they found scattered around as tools. Every part of the creature that had tried to kill them was now serving as their protection. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the clearing, they sat around the small fire they'd built, their faces illuminated by its flickering light. The flames crackled, sending up occasional sparks into the darkening sky. It was almost peaceful, almost like they had finally found a brief respite from the madness of Scythe. But the peace didn't last long. A sudden, bone-chilling shriek pierced the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the jungle. The humans froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. The scream was not the same as the venom hounds. It was higher, more shrill, like a bird of prey calling to the night. But there was something else in it, something primal, something hungry. "We're not alone," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Stay quiet. Stay low. It's coming this way." The group quickly fell into position, crouching behind the crude barriers they had constructed, weapons ready. They had no idea what this new threat was, but they knew one thing for sure. It was big, and it was coming for them. The air was still, the only sounds the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. Then the ground trembled slightly, too slight to be an earthquake, but enough to send a wave of unease through the group. It was moving closer. A shape emerged from the trees, its outline barely visible in the fading light. It was huge, taller than the venom hound, with a hunched back and long, sinewy limbs. Its eyes were glowing red, casting an eerie light as it scanned the clearing. It wasn't alone. Another one stepped into view, then another. The humans counted 4 of them. They weren't creatures of muscle like the Tusk-Stalker, nor were they quick and deadly like the venom hound. They were something else entirely. An ambush predator, a pack that used numbers to overwhelm its prey. The humans' pulse quickened as they realized that this wasn't just an attack. It was a hunt. Marcus clenched his jaw. "Stay calm. We fight together. Don't break ranks." The creatures slowly encircled the clearing, their eyes watching, their movements synchronized. The humans' hearts beat faster, but there was no panic in their stance. They were ready. They had learned to fight back, and now they had to put everything they had learned into practice. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. And they would win. The humans' breath was shallow as they crouched in the shadows, their eyes locked on the pack of creatures circling the clearing. There was no room for error. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about proving they could dominate this world, not be crushed by it. The creatures that surrounded them were not mindless beasts. They were intelligent, organized, and deadly. But the humans had something the predators didn't: adaptability, strategy, and the will to survive. Marcus gave a quick nod to Sarah, who was positioned to his right. She understood without words. This was their moment. The creatures had split into smaller groups, each moving in a slow arc around the clearing. They weren't charging. They were testing, probing for weaknesses. "On my signal," Marcus whispered, his voice steady. "When they close in, we strike fast." Sarah gave a subtle nod, her hand tightening around her spear. The others mimicked her, their weapons raised and ready. They had no high-tech weapons, no advanced gear, just crude tools they had fashioned from the Tusk-Stalker's bones and rocks. But they had learned the hard way that it wasn't the weapons that mattered. It was the mind behind them. The pack's leader, a massive creature with gleaming red eyes, stopped a few paces away from their position. Its body was covered in dark, thick fur, and its elongated claws scraped the earth. It sniffed the air, its ears twitching. It was close, too close. Marcus held his breath. The seconds seemed to stretch like hours. Then, with a sudden motion, the creature lunged. "Now!" Marcus barked. The humans sprang into action. Sarah darted forward, hurling a blazing torch she had kept ready directly at the pack leader's face. The creature screeched as the flames caught on its fur, momentarily blinding it. But it wasn't enough to stop it. Its claws lashed out, swinging wildly as it tried to shake off the fire. In that instant, Marcus and the others surged from their cover. They didn't wait for the creatures to regain control. They attacked. Marcus thrust his spear into the flank of the pack leader, the crude weapon piercing its thick fur and sinking deep into its side. The creature howled in pain, its massive form lurching sideways, but it was far from defeated. At the same time, another human, Jake, leaped onto one of the smaller creatures, driving a sharpened bone through its neck. The beast bucked and writhed, but Jake's grip was firm, and the predator's struggles quickly subsided. It fell limp beneath him. The pack roared in fury, their eyes flashing with rage as they closed in, but the humans didn't falter. They were fighting together now, no longer just individuals trying to survive, but a unit, a team with a single goal. They moved with practiced coordination, drawing the predators into traps, striking with precision where their enemies were weakest. A roar cut through the chaos. The pack leader, now enraged, spun around to face Marcus, its red eyes locking onto him with murderous intent. But before it could charge, Sarah lunged forward, her spear aimed at its throat. She wasn't fast enough to land a fatal blow, but the strike distracted it long enough for Marcus to rip the weapon from its side, shifting his stance and lunging once again. This time, the spear plunged deep into the creature's neck. The leader's roar turned into a gurgle choke, and with one final desperate thrash, it collapsed to the ground, its body twitching in death. The remaining predators hesitated, their eyes flicking between the fallen leader and the humans who had taken it down. That hesitation was all they needed. The humans pressed the advantage, launching a final coordinated attack. Each strike was aimed with ruthless precision, targeting weak points, the soft underbelly, the eyes, the joints where the creatures were most vulnerable. One by one, the remaining predators fell. Minutes later, the clearing was still. The humans stood in the aftermath, panting heavily, covered in blood and sweat. Their faces were a mix of exhaustion, relief, and triumph. They had faced down a pack of cunning, organized predators and emerged victorious. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow and turned to the group. "We did it. They were dangerous, but we were smarter." Sarah gave him a tired but satisfied smile. "We're learning. We're getting better." The other humans nodded, their expressions determined. This world might have tried to kill them with every step, but it had only made them stronger. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming the apex predators on Scythe. But Marcus knew this victory wouldn't last forever. Scythe was a world that threw challenges at them with relentless speed. There would be more creatures, more dangers, and more tests. And they would face them together. The humans stood amidst the carnage, breathing heavily as the smoke from the battle began to settle. The clearing, once a tranquil patch of land, was now littered with the remains of the pack that had dared to hunt them. The air still crackled with tension, but there was also something else. A sense of purpose, a quiet understanding that they had crossed a threshold. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, yet full of awe. She stood over one of the fallen creatures, her spear dripping with its dark blood. The hunt had been brutal, but they had fought as one. No longer were they just a handful of survivors from an abandoned shipwreck. They were a force that could bend the planet to its will. Marcus looked at the others, his gaze firm, calculating. "This is just a small victory. We have to keep moving." He wasn't wrong. Despite their triumph, the jungle was far from forgiving. The sun was dipping below the horizon, and Scythe's night cycle was rapidly approaching. The night on this planet was a deadly thing. There were creatures that hunted by moonlight, nocturnal predators that made daytime monsters seem like children's stories. They had to stay ahead of the danger, or the danger would consume them. "We need to find shelter," Marcus continued, scanning the darkening jungle around them. Now, Sarah nodded, wiping the blood from her hands, eyes narrowing as she looked into the shadowed trees. I saw a cave to the west earlier when we were scouting. If we hurry, we might be able to make it before nightfall. Without waiting for any objections, Marcus turned, and a group followed. They didn't speak much on the way. Their bodies were sore from the battle, but the adrenaline still coursed through their veins. Every step was purposeful, each one taking them closer to safety. The jungle was eerily quiet as they moved deeper into its heart. The oppressive silence seemed unnatural, as though the world was holding its breath. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the dense foliage. Marcus led the group with grim determination, knowing that this world would not give them another chance. Every moment of complacency could be their last. When they finally reached the cave, it was already dark. The entrance was hidden behind a thick veil of vines, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. They slipped inside quickly, their eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The cave was smaller than they'd hoped, but it offered a measure of safety. They could hear the distant calls of creatures in the jungle, but for now, they were hidden. "I'll take first watch," Marcus said, kneeling down by the entrance. "Get some rest. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." The others didn't argue. They had learned the value of rest, but they had also learned the importance of vigilance. Sleep would come, but only after they were sure they were safe. The cave's interior was rough, its walls damp and cold. They huddled together for warmth, their backs against the hard stone. The exhaustion was beginning to catch up to them, but they all knew they couldn't afford to lose focus. The hours passed slowly as Marcus sat in the entrance, his eyes scanning the darkness. The jungle seemed alive with the hum of unseen creatures, the rustling of leaves, the occasional snap of a branch. He kept his ears sharp for anything out of place. Every sound, every movement could be a threat. Then, just as the tension began to ease, a soft, eerie sound pierced the night. It was a low, almost melodic hum, drifting on the wind. It sounded like a song, or a call. But it wasn't any song the humans had heard before. Marcus's instincts flared. He held up a hand, signaling the others to remain silent. The hum grew louder, closer. His grip tightened around his spear, his eyes scanning the shadows for any movement. "They're here," he muttered under his breath. The creatures they had just fought off were not the only predators on Scythe. This planet had a deeper, more sinister rhythm, one they had only begun to understand. The hum didn't stop. It was growing louder, filling the cave with an unsettling pressure. The ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate slightly, as though the entire world was alive in ways that defied reason. The hum grew into a low, resonating thrum, a sound that almost felt like it was inside their heads. Suddenly, a shape moved across the mouth of the cave. It was quick, a blur in the darkness. "Get ready," Marcus hissed, his voice barely audible. The others readied their weapons, gripping them tightly. The sounds from outside intensified, creatures moving closer, converging. They could hear the rustling of leaves, the shifting of rocks. Something was out there, something that had been watching them. And they weren't alone. The eerie hum outside the cave had grown louder, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. It was not like anything the humans had encountered before. No animal, no creature they'd fought or seen had ever made a sound like this. It felt alien, something intelligent, something intentional. Marcus kept his hand raised, signaling for silence. His eyes narrowed in the direction of the sound, his every sense on edge. The others held their breath, each of them instinctively pressing closer to the cave's rough stone walls, their weapons ready but their nerves frayed. The humming grew louder. Then the unmistakable scrape of claws on rock echoed in the distance, followed by the shifting of something heavy through the dense foliage. It was too coordinated, too deliberate to be a random predator. The jungle had gone still. Even the wind had stopped moving. It wasn't just the creatures that were out there. It was something more. "It's a signal," Sarah murmured, her voice tense. "Whatever it is, it's trying to communicate." Marcus nodded grimly. "And it knows we're here. Stay alert." The sound stopped. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. It was only then, in the quiet, that they heard it. A whisper, faint, like the wind, but not wind at all. A voice, clear and resonant, echoed through the night. "We see you, humans." The voice was not mechanical, not digital. It was a whisper that vibrated in their skulls, a low tone that resonated deep within them. It sounded ancient, as if it had been echoing across the planet for eons. Marcus's grip tightened on his spear. "Get ready," he muttered. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Was this another predator? Another trial designed to break them? Or was it something more? An intelligence beyond the creatures they'd already fought? The sound of something large scraping through the brush outside grew louder again, followed by the unmistakable thump of heavy footsteps. The ground shook slightly beneath them. Then, from the shadows, emerged the source of the hum, a figure, towering and sleek, almost shimmering in the moonlight. It was humanoid, but unlike any human. Its skin was a deep shade of midnight blue, marked with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with an eerie glow. It stood over 8 feet tall, its body long and lithe, with limbs that were far too elegant, too perfect, for something natural. Its head was bald, elongated and smooth, with large insect-like eyes that shone like molten silver. A deep, unsettling intelligence radiated from its gaze. More figures emerged behind it, each one moving with unnatural grace. They were not creatures of flesh and bone like the predators they had fought. These beings, whatever they were something else entirely. The leader of the group stepped forward, its voice rippling through the air once again. "You are the ones who killed our children. You think you are the apex predators. You are mistaken." The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating the humans with their meaning. These creatures, these beings, were not just animals. They were intelligent, purposeful, and now, it seemed, they were aware of the humans' presence. Sarah clenched her spear, her heart racing. They're not from here. They came here. This is their home. Marcus's mind spun. He thought about their survival so far. The Tuskstalker, the Venomhound pack, the ambush predators. All of them had been tests, but these beings were different. They weren't just surviving. They were aware of the humans, aware of their presence and their actions. The glowing eyes of the creature fixed on Marcus. "We gave you a world to die on. Yet you survive. You take what is ours, and you thrive." "How?" Marcus swallowed hard, his voice low and calm. "We adapt. We learn." The leader tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Then learn this." In a flash, the figure raised one long arm, and a sudden sharp crack of energy shot through the air, striking the ground in front of them. The explosion shook the cave, sending rocks and dust flying. The humans stumbled back, their ears ringing from the blast. The energy, some sort of weapon, had been powerful, precise. "We need to move," Marcus shouted, his voice commanding. Now. There was no time to think. The cave entrance, once their haven, was now a death trap. They darted out of the cave and into the jungle, the humanoid figures behind them moving with terrifying speed. The humming was back, resonating through the air, filling their minds with a sense of foreboding. The beings were on them, faster than anything they had ever faced. The humans ran through the dense jungle, dodging between trees, their bodies pushed to the limit. But the creatures were faster, almost too fast. "Split up," Marcus shouted. "We have to confuse them." Without a second thought, they scattered, each heading in a different direction, hoping to evade the aliens who had so easily predicted their movements. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. The glowing eyes of the beings now visible through the trees, their figures moving like shadows. As he ran, his mind raced. They had been survivors, but now They had to face something greater, a force that wasn't just a predator. It was a hunter of an entirely different kind. And now, the real battle for survival was about to begin.